Okay, everybody. So it's absolutely lovely to see you all, and thank you so much for joining. So just to quickly tell you, those who don't know me, I'm Jo. I'm a series producer and edit producer, and I also run training. And I really wanted to put on this remote editing session because I have not done any remote edit producing or remote editing, and I was just really intrigued to know how it was done. And then I just thought, well, if I'm intrigued, I'm sure lots of other people are. So I got together this panel of people who are very kindly agreeing to share their experiences, and they're each going to do around 10 minutes each, a sort of Q&A with me hosting, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from you guys. Also, there's going to be some future talks in remote filming and remote pre-production and development coming up, so look out for them, because I think the future is remote, so let's just all share and learn from each other. Right, so we're going to start speaking to Matt Gordon, who is a freelance exec at a company called Woodcut Media. He has been doing remote editing for the longest that I know, which is why I got him on board. He's been doing it for at least 2 years as an exec and an edit producer. And Woodcut do a lot of history and true crime series. So, oh, you've just disappeared, Matt. I don't know whether that's just from my view.
Still there.
Oh, it's still there, just from my view. Okay.
I feel like an idiot now, waving.
And so one of your series has the most fantastic name, The World's Most Evil Killers. So I like the sound of that one. But I know you've done many, many more. So could you just start by explaining how come you and Woodcut have done so much remote editing for so long?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I mean, I've been an edit producer and exec producer for many years since they were first invented, and I've edited in just about every post-production house in the country, including ClearCut for many, many moons. So the reason I've been remote editing for the last 2 years is I moved, having spent a big shift about 2 years ago, freelancing, bit of exec, bit of series producing, bit of edit producing. I moved to Woodcut Media, who are a regional production company based partially in sort of towards Southampton. And being in Southampton, we have a lot of people come from London, a lot of people, Torral's off, a lot of people who come from London and a lot of people who live locally. But what Woodcut do is they do a lot of editing themselves. A lot of our offline editors are based in the office in Southampton and often in a big room. So when some of the shows are talking head shows, some of them are not. Some of them are more immersive of docs. Some of them are more mixture of things with reconstruction and all sorts of things. But what we often do is the edit producers or directors will work often from their homes with the editors who are based in the office in Southampton. So we go backwards and forwards with scripts and things. And so because the office, one, isn't big enough for everyone to fit into in Southampton, and two, if we were all, lots of our edit producers and directors are based in London, if they're all commuting every day down to Southampton, it's a right royal pain in the arse. And when we've got 2 or 3 editors in a room, it doesn't really work having everyone sitting next to each other. So that's why we've been doing it.
Okay, and so for newcomers to it, what would you say are the most important things to sort of set in place and to get sorted before you start a production with remote editing?
Well, from an edit producer point of view, the most important thing is that everybody is working off the same set of information. So if, like, one of my editors I work with actually lives in Bristol, and so he would come down to Southampton at the beginning of a production and pick up all the rushes. There would be a duplicate drive in Southampton. There would be a duplicate drive available for the producer or edit producer if they wanted it. We just had to make sure that all clips are called the same thing, all things are called the same thing, that we're not calling things final, and that there's one copy of scripts, and if people are accessing the same things, they're not renaming it, duplicating it, etc. So it's just about organising, bit of organisation to make sure that everybody remotely is looking at the same information. Otherwise, things fall apart very quickly. If you're referring to a clip name and they've called it, oh, I've renamed it Reel A, then we're in real trouble if I've called it Reel B, and things just don't add up together. So it's just being very organised and taking ownership for your organisation. So editors, edit producers, anyone else involved, assistant editors, all have to make sure that those rules are abided by, because things dissolve very, very quickly if they're not.
Okay. So yeah, I was going to say, how important is sort of clear communication and sort of advanced preparation? And do you have anything, like, for instance, I think you told me that you normally, the edit producer or the edit assistant would start a week in advance of the editor?
Yeah. So the way we do it, so we get everything transcribed, and that includes, you know, out in the field, sort of more docky stuff. We get everything transcribed, even if it's from a free transcription service like Temi or something like that. We get everything transcribed because it makes it easier to at least locate roughly what you want to look at. And if you're not sitting there and going through all the rushes, the first thing the edit producers will do will pull out from their massive transcriptions for each interview or bit of actuality the bits that they want to see. And we have an assistant editor who then dumps those onto a timeline, not quite a sync pool, but on a timeline sync pool for the bits we want to see. And they send them over to the edit producer so that you're whittling down what you're working with. And the first pass is often done from transcript. And then we'll have a timeline that the assistant editor and the edit producer will have, which you'll be able to see what all the bits that you think are interesting look like, and see if they're then out of focus or stuttery or rubbish. And so you can then build from that. And so we have an assistant editor who works for a good week beforehand so that we can put together the main bits of it, because we don't have remote access viewing of the editor's timeline, but we do, if we want, have all the rushes. But actually I've learned to work without the rushes, because I do my first sync pool, for example, off a transcript, and then the assistant editor will send me, instead of sending me a 3-hour interview, will send me an hour of rushes via WeTransfer, and then I know what everything looks like. And I might do that for 3 interviews, and then take that and turn that into a rough sync pool. So narrowing down each time, and then at that point will involve an editor, and the assistant editor might send those sync pools to the editor, and then we'll refer to those. And again, that's where naming convention knows, so that we're referring to a script that's calling it cut, and we date everything and often time it. So 18th of May, 3 p.m. There's a script that says 18th of May, 3 p.m. There's a cut that says 18th of May, 3 p.m. so that we know we're referring to the same things. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes. Richard, would you mind turning your video off, if you don't mind?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, and what sort of technologies are you using? Forcine or Blackbird, or using Avid loggers, or?
Tried all of those, and in reality, we are doing it. We mostly end up doing it in a very lo-fi way, which is that we all have copies of stuff. We have transcripts. We have Word. We have Zoom and calls, and we transfer or use Vimeo to upload cuts, because once I've got what the assistant editor is working from, or the editor is working from, so if I've got a sync pool that we've managed to make, she send it to me, I can refine my script, send some notes or a new updated script, the assistant editor can work on that, and we're getting new scripts every day. So if I'm working with the editor, I'll have a log of all the rushes and on them on a drive if necessary, or if they're still being shot, low res ones will get sent to me, and I can refer to those and put them in the script. But because at least once or twice a day we're doing a play out which gets WeTransferred, it's a very low tech way of doing it, but ultimately it's not that different from sitting next to an editor and saying let's watch it together, because you're just sending it to me I'm watching what you've just played out. There's editors will always find something to get on with while I'm watching it and giving them a new cut. Or in theory, if I'm working on part 1, they can start work on part 2. We often break it up like that. So really the editor is using their editing software, whether it's Avid or Premiere. I use Word, Vimeo, and make sure I've got a good video player so that I can play whatever it is. You do need a fast internet connection though, because cuts can be quite big. If you're on a rubbish modem, there's very little you can do. And that's the same whether you're streaming or using 4Scene. I mean, I've done it with 4Scene as well and things like that. But cost-wise, it didn't always work out to be necessary the way we're doing things. So
okay,
we
brilliant.
get used to it.
Okay, well, I'm sure there'll be some more questions to you, but we'll move on to Sarah and Derek, so Derek is an editor, Sarah is a SP and senior edit producer, and they both made the recent hospital special about the virus, and the entire thing was made remotely in the edit, and you guys had never done remote editing before and had to kind of learn how to do it as you were doing it, and I think you had only 4 weeks to get the program from start to on air. So firstly, Sarah, what was that like for you? How different was it from normal edit producing?
So initially I thought it was going to be really complicated, but actually we were doing it via the farm and they made the whole system really, really easy. They sent us a quick email that said, this is to test your internet connection, literally 10 seconds, tested it, it was fine. Then we didn't need any extra kit. They used a system called Teradici. So I could just open it on my laptop, and then basically it was like seeing an Avid. I could see all the rushes. We all had our own projects, and we just started pulling stuff immediately. The complicated thing, which is partly we were doing such fast turnaround, hospital also, you're basically filming whilst you're editing, so you never know what's going to happen with the stories. So whilst you're sort of cutting stuff, you're also speaking to the directors on the ground saying, this story seems really good, can you get a bit more of this character's really good, keep going with this one, da 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 da. So you're it's sort of being created in the edit much more than probably most episodes of series where you get all your rushes and then you start making it. The complicated thing was, because it was such fast turnaround, that there was 3 editors working remotely simultaneously on the same episode. So there was a lot, as Matthew was saying, a lot of being really organised with labelling, rushes, speaking to one another. We were doing daily Zoom conversations, but more than, particularly at the beginning, more than that, we were WhatsApping all the time to each other. I'm looking at this, don't worry about that. I've looked at this, it's not very good. And sort of that sort of thing. So we all knew what we were doing. And exactly as Matt said, the labelling conventions, I think, had to stay the same. So yeah, I mean, Derek, have you got anything to sort of add on that?
Yeah, no, exactly what Matt was saying, that the organisation of whoever sets up the project in the first place is really essential, because, yeah, you've all got to just make sure you follow that, whatever the system is. Whoever decides on how it's going to flow, you need to stick to it. So also we'd have folders within, so Sarah would have a project, each editor obviously had a project. You were sharing a project though, Sarah, weren't you, with two other people. You were sharing with an editor and another edit producer, but you had your own folder, so everything was kept within those folders. And likewise, if I was sending a pull or a cut to Sarah, you basically put it into my folder in her project. So everything was contained within separate folders. So that was, really key, just making sure, because otherwise the projects just get really messy and scrappy and people end up deleting things that they shouldn't, or moving things that they shouldn't. Oh, yeah. So you do have to have, from a edit producer point of view, a fairly good understanding of Avid, I'd say, wouldn't you, Sarah?
Yeah. Which I thought I did until I started re-pulling some of the editors' work and knocking out all their music cuts and things like that, which I think they found quite frustrating. So I stopped doing that after a while. I just say, can I just watch it?
The thing is, the main thing is all the editors give copies of whatever they're doing anyway. So it's not like you haven't got the original copy, so it's fine. So it doesn't matter if something happens. So, you know, you just have to have that backup.
That's where we ended up. Sorry, that's why we ended up eventually just sending each other copies, because if you are working on the same thing.
Exactly.
And it's the same with scripts. It's worth, can I just say, it's worth you keeping your own script locally and only sharing it when you're willing for someone else to mess with it.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to tread on other people's toes if you're not watching what you're doing.
The other important thing I think is really key is that when you are logging at the beginning and going through the rushes for each day, someone had set up a system with markers. So basically a red marker would be good sync, a yellow marker would be okay sync, and everyone stuck to that rule. So basically, everyone, when you got that pull, you could see that was on there, and people write, what people were saying on the markers. So that was already clear. If you were sharing materials, that was really good.
So do you kind of need a lead editor or a lead edit producer, somebody who sort of defines how you're going to organize the project and how you
do need someone to probably set a system up so that everyone follows it, because it doesn't matter what the system is. It's like, as long as everyone follows that and doesn't start doing their own thing.
We basically agreed it, didn't we? On our first day one of our Zoom call, we just said, right, good yellow, red's okay, because we were going through the rushes so fast. We had 200 hours of rushes. Our first viewing of an hour programme was after 2 weeks with the execs, and I think the BBC saw it the following day. So what we were doing was we were marking everything up, and then we were making quite fast decisions about what characters we thought were good and what stories we thought were good quite quickly, but we knew we could always go back to the rushes that were all really, really clearly marked up if we needed anything extra.
Mm-hmm.
We also had, because there's 3 editors on each episode 1 and 2, and then we had, on top of that, we had 2 edit producers as well, plus Sara and plus Mark, who was on episode 1 as series editors. So we had a lot of people pulling rushes, so obviously we had to make sure, using WhatsApp, we weren't doubling up on looking at the footage. So people just post as soon as they started watching something and marking it up or pulling it, you just post it on the WhatsApp, and that was really useful, because the Zoom's okay, but it does take a lot of time when you Zoom. So at the beginning, the first few days, I think that's right, so we did quite a few Zooms, didn't we? And then after that, it was really just following the WhatsApp and everyone keeping up to date on that.
And then
kind of essential, actually.
And then what I was doing separately from that was I was having separate independent conversations with the 3 editors just on the phone separately, and the other 2 edit producers.
Yeah.
So I was coordinating it.
The way we kind of divided up the rushes, because obviously it was still being filmed and you've got stuff coming all the time, is we just divide up characters. So whatever character stories one editor would stick to, so I'd do Stanley or whoever, and then the other editor would do another character, and that we kind of kept to that because it was just made more sense. A new material coming in, we would look at that character rather than someone else start doing it. Having said that, we did have a really good edit producer, Dan, who basically also was pulling stuff for us and sort of marking stuff up very quickly, which really helped, actually. That helped a lot.
Yeah.
So you had, the fast turnaround and the edit happening at the same time as the filming were 2 extra elements on top of the remote editing. So all in all, you were doing something absolutely crazy, but so well done for pulling it off for such a good show. With the remote editing aspect of it alone, focusing on that bit, in what ways was this a good experience and one you'd like to repeat, and in what ways was it something, what things did you not like about it that you would prefer to go into an edit house for the offline for?
I liked absolutely everything about it. For me, it was fantastic. The system worked so well. We were doing crazy hours, we were doing 7 days a week, 15-hour days. And if I had to do a commute on top of that, it would have broken me. And we did those hours Probably.
We were averaging 67 hours a week because we
Yeah.
were doing weekends as well. And yeah, as you say, if we had 10 to 15 hour days, it wasn't all every day,
No.
but if you had that and the commute, I don't think we would have done it. I really don't. I don't think we could have managed it. It would have been too difficult. It's so much easier ending the day in your house and also being able to sort of eat in your house.
But you don't want that to become like, oh, so all productions are remotely edited because they get more for their money by, look, you're prepared to work longer hours if you do it from home.
Yeah, I mean, this was an exception because
Yeah.
it was fast turnaround because it was, you know, they had to get it out. Yeah, you wouldn't want that to happen all the time. There's no way. I mean, God, normally there's no way to do 10-hour days, for God's sake. I'm too old for that. But
Any other good
it worked. It worked. I was kind of not looking forward to the remote part at all, and I found it quite weird when you're suddenly sat on a Zoom facing execs, you know, because we had viewings and then we'd have a Zoom call with the execs and commissioners. There's, you know, there's probably 5 people, different people or more, isn't there? And that's quite an odd thing when you're sort of not used to that, suddenly doing it all on screen. But I have to say, by the end of it, I was total comfort.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you did the execs do viewings? Were they in pajamas in their in their living rooms and stuff?
And we did have the commissioning editor in his bedroom with his baby cot in the background and all the crap everywhere, which is quite funny. So yeah, it was quite interesting seeing it at home.
Different way, yeah.
Yeah, but I think you know, it was a different situation because it was quite a quick turnaround, and also I think the reason it worked was from the software point of view and hardware point of view, is that I wasn't actually using Avid software at home. I thought I was going to have to. It was all done by Teradici, which was the software run at the farm. So I was effectively operating my computer from the farm remotely. And I have to say, apart from logging on, we had a few glitches logging on in the mornings. There was less technical hitches than when I was working in a facility.
Wow.
And the other thing is, if I didn't have to worry about, you know, loading in rushes, ingesting stuff, because they did all that for you. So I mean, that took a lot of, you know, that off our hands basically. That was really good.
Okay, well that leads me very nicely on to Jess and Rowan, who are from Clearcut, who are going to talk about the perspective of the edit house. So Rowan is the MD of Clearcut and Jess is the technical director. And so it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective. This was no doubt one of the most sort of rapid and dramatic changes that you had to sort of put into place into how your edit houses were working. So how quickly did you have to come up with sort of new solutions for remote editing for projects?
Well, actually, we were in quite a fortunate position because we had a facility up in Birmingham that we were using a remote solution for about 4 years. We'd only really been using it sort of in the background and not really as an editing. We hadn't been editing with it. It was more sort of like the operational, technical operations side, ingest, playouts, all that kind of stuff, MCR. But we knew it worked. And so when we had to sort of scale up very quickly, this was the solution. We knew we had it already. And yeah, I mean, we had to put it into place in over 100 edit suites in a matter of days. I mean, that was a strain on everyone, those few days where it was sort of very, very long hours. And part of the process there was just getting everyone on the system, because there was so many edit suites that had to get onto the system. And so our solution is very similar to the farms. It's this model which is BYOD, bring your own device. So effectively you're logging into the infrastructure of the facility rather than having to have kit at home and software and all the rest of it. So yeah, like Derek was saying, you know, you've got your own laptop, you can use that. One of the benefits of the solution we had and that we utilized was the fact that we could have the edit producer and the editor both in the same session. So they were both looking at the same Avid, and then they could talk to each other remotely. So that really worked. So that initially was a bit of a challenge, and obviously sort of the way that the bring your own device thing works is that you have to authenticate devices, because obviously security is a big issue once you've got lots of people onto the internet. But that's one of the benefits as well, because all the facility house is behind the corporate firewall, and we get sort of tested regularly for that kind of thing. So the security, the rushes are secure. You've also got your centralized technical support team for ingest and queries and all that kind of stuff. And everyone, you can have the tech support team can log into the Avid at the same time as the editors looking at it, and it's just actually, I think we found it like a really collaborative way of working, and so that was one of the things that we had to get going, was the over 100 edit suites on that system. The other things that sort of challenges for us as well were, that was just really for offline, but actually we sort of did utilize a bit of it for finishing as well. So a lot of the work could be done remotely, but there are certain things that actually you still need to have the really expensive monitors. And so we had to ship a load of kit out to our creatives. So all of our creatives have got like online edit suites in their lounges and living rooms and things. So so we had to get all of our creatives set up, and the dubbing mixers as well. We're doing some work from home, but that was getting that all done at the same time. So
That's exhausting, and training people up in how to use it, and probably lots of panicked phone calls from people.
Yeah, I mean, the training up aspect wasn't too bad, because actually it was very simple. It's very similar to Teradici, in that there really wasn't much that you had to do apart from sort of log in, and then you're there. You're into your project. But sort of the admin side of it, I think, for us, because we have to go through a process of sending emails, getting people's device names, authenticating those devices against credentials, and so that bit was sort of long-winded, but it's a necessary thing to do in order to preserve the security and integrity of everything.
And was it down to the production themselves? Like if an edit producer or an editor didn't have a high enough spec computer to work on, or fast enough, or whatever, was it up to the production to provide it to them, and then, or was it up to the edit house?
Actually, you know what, we had so many client computers that were not being used, that if someone didn't have a laptop, we would just send them out a client computer with a monitor, and they could have multiple screens as well. So it was really replicating the edit suite environment as well. So what we found initially, there was a lot of skepticism about it. People weren't sure if it was going to work. I think some people have been burnt in the past with remote solutions. We really had to do a job on convincing people, look, just give it a go, try it. Honestly, it works. And we had the sort of biggest challenge was making sure that people were wired, rather than on Wi-Fi. Once they were wired, that was a really important aspect of making sure that this works.
That's with an Ethernet cable, hardwiring your computer straight into the internet at home.
Into the router, yeah. I mean, the Wi-Fi worked, but the experience wasn't the same as or as good as you would have if you were wired. So just sort of getting people a lot of people are ordering like 20-meter cables and things like that.
Okay. Does that make a huge difference? So if you've got bad Wi-Fi or bad internet, would that make a huge difference, just having that cable?
Oh yeah, massive difference. Yeah, I mean, because the thing about the internet is what you're trying to avoid is latency. You need your pictures and your audio to be in sync. Otherwise, for an editor, for anyone watching it, it's impossible to make those kind of creative decisions and judgments. So what we were aiming to do was to just make sure that the setup at the remote user was optimal as it possibly could be, and the quickest and easiest thing for that was just plug it into the router. It will be perfect.
Okay. So do you think this is the future then, that there might be more, even when the vaccine's been discovered and widely used, that people might remotely offline from home and then maybe just come into the post houses for the online?
I definitely think it will have its uses. I think that speaking to a lot of editors, it sounds to me as if maybe there'll be like a hybrid of maybe the first couple of weeks will be done at home, doing assembly edits, things like that, and just sort of reviewing the rushes, and then maybe coming into the facility to do the sort of creative story building. I think that would definitely finishing wise. I think you just can't replicate a facility in terms of finishing. We've got very specialized environments built for audio and for color grading and things like that, and everything we do remotely in that respect is a compromise. There's no getting around it. So I think finishing will always be done at the facility house, but I think that there will be a hybrid, because actually what's really important as well is, whilst people are collaborating remotely, and it does work to a degree, I still think there's a missing, the nuances of human interaction is something, and I just don't think you can emulate that on Zoom or on a conference.
Well, I feel like you can be very decisive like this remotely, or indecisive depending on what the situation is, but having a sort of really thoughtful discussion where you're sort of maybe, I don't know, musing on something or trying
I thought you wouldn't be able to do that, but we did. But I think the difference is that I already knew Sarah.
Yeah,
I think it would be much trickier if I didn't know Sarah, or if I didn't know the person I was working with. I think it would be a bit difficult. But because we knew each other and we knew other people on the team, it made it easier, because you just, you speak the same language, so it's easier.
Well, I do agree with that. I mean, most of my team have all met each other and know each other, and the editor I use in Bristol, I know him really well, and we've met each other. And he did come down to the office, and we've known each other and got drunk together and all that sort of thing. So, it does make a difference to have had that personal connection at some point. And it does mean that when we're hiring editors to work remotely, we hire teams that we know work.
Already, you kind of know each other's language, if you type something in capital letters, Matt, they won't take offense.
I never do that. That's not true, but you know what I mean. No, we have a note system. So if we send notes, that we all use the same system. So if something is new and wants to go in, it's in a certain color in the script. If something's existing and it's got to come out, we highlight it in a certain color in the script, and it all comes back down to that organization and everybody knowing what the language we're using is. So, and I'd just like to add WhatsApp. You mentioned we make sure that we all run WhatsApp web, so that it's on your computer as well, so that if someone sends a bit of text or a bit of something, you can copy and paste it, and that's very useful because it's instant and you couldn't work without it.
Matt, what were you using for sharing your screen, by the way? For when editors share their screen.
We mostly didn't. I mean, mostly we would play out sections at a time and then refer to it, and then we would chat. Yeah. Oh, we do it totally old school. Yeah. Same as if you would play out a cut and say, you watch that while I'm fiddling around over this. That's what we did. And we would. Yes,
if you got the time in your hands, it's different, isn't it? So if you got normal time, you can do that. Yeah,
and because we're used to doing it, we'd work on. I'd send notes on part 2 while they'd send me part 1.
Yeah.
And then obviously when we did viewings with commissioners or all that sort of thing, we'd send them the remote cut, and they're not in the room. It is the same, but then we'd have a debrief, and we wouldn't always include the editor in that. Sometimes we would, sometimes we wouldn't, but we'd have a really detailed debrief where we can refer to the cut. And I do have a double screen set up at home, and all our editors have got it so that we can have the cut on one screen, and you can work on, and you have to have a double screen set up. It's really hard.
I agree. I mean, I had a laptop with, emails and stuff like that, and then a separate screen for the Avid. You definitely need it. Yeah.
One of the nice things that we did for finishing as well, for content sign off, was we actually took a stream out of the Avid that would come up as a separate stream in a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet meeting. So that was like, we were using that mainly for online. So you're looking at sort of final audio and final pictures, really. And then that would go out to as many people as you wanted to review it. And that's a really nice way of being able to collaborate on rather than having to export a file and then send it and then wait for everyone. Everyone was just watching the same thing at the same time and then collaborating and making their notes.
Yeah, we have done that with for online in the finishing, because we use a remote. We don't do all our finishing ourselves. As you've said, dubbing and all that grading and all the testing and all that has to be done at a facility. And so we have a remote facility that, again, we do that remotely. And pre-lockdown, I would go to the facility and sit there. Post-lockdown, we're doing much as you've said. And the finishing is always different. So we do offline very much remotely, but we've worked around the system of doing the rest, like you said.
Okay. What's about?
Sorry, I was just going to respond. Somebody asked a question about notes from execs and commissioners. Sadly, I don't think being remote actually made a huge amount of difference. We still got notes and everything exactly the same, and we do the Zoom calls with everyone post a viewing. And then often, because the commissioners were really busy, they'd have to go off on another Zoom call. They would just email notes. So sadly, it didn't really make much difference.
It's pretty much the same, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's right. It doesn't.
Okay, I was going to say about rushes. If you were getting additional footage, this is actually for the post houses. Is there somebody in the post house, like a very skeleton crew, who are ingesting stuff as it comes in, and how is that working?
So the tech support team were mostly working from home as well. So and we were encouraging productions to actually send us the rushes via Media Shuttle, which means you can just upload them. But that all depended on the speed of the internet, the upload speed of the internet connection of the person that was sending the rushes, and obviously, with home internet, the upload speed is the bit that's normally quite slow. So you may have to go somewhere else. But we would have a skeleton crew on site with just one person in each building that would be there just in case, say, maybe a system crashed and needed someone to restart it, manually. We would have someone there, and those people could also plug in drives if they came in and do the ingest. But the actual work itself was predominantly being done by a tech support team that were working from home.
Right, so all these posh places in Soho are really it's going to be a bit of a waste of rent, isn't it? If they're not really needed for even the ingest anymore.
Well, I think that the beauty of it is that we can now sell above our capacity. We can sell the suites and we can sell remote as well.
Oh, okay.
Fantastic, yeah.
On hospital, they did have a skeleton staff because the rushes were being dropped off in Soho and they were being digested and turned around really fast.
Yeah. I'd say, just going back to something that Derek said really, really early on about hours and the number of hours editors are working. So I look at the dashboard and I can see all the edit suites and I can see when people are logged in and when they're not. And it's really surprised me just how the amount of hours the editors are working at the moment. It's like they are working weekends, they're working nights, and these are not necessarily on fast turnaround jobs. This is just standard work. So it is something that I've noticed that people are, the commute is from the bed to the computer, and even myself, I'm sort of waking up and thinking I can just turn it on, I can start working now straight away, rather than going and having my breakfast that I might normally do. I might just get on.
But what's lovely about it, particularly if you're a working parent, is you can work it not on this because we were just flat out, but on a normal job you can work it much more around what suits you. So say you wanted to drop the kids off at school, you could do an hour in the morning, go and drop them off, you could then catch up, you can work into the evening, but you can go and put them to bed. It's just, for me, just the flexibility of the hours was brilliant.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do just that, and since doing this, and I've been doing it a while, one of the reasons I did do it is one of my kids goes to school up the road, and I walk him to school every day, and I can walk him to school every back, and we're quite often, we will work later, but I also, in lockdown, I can go and have lunch with the whole family, although the kids are all hassling me and telling me my dinner's ready, but you see what I mean? But we can schedule that family time that normally, even if you're working a really long edit, you're not going to see them.
Yeah.
I agree, because even if your hours are normal, and working in a facility, you might finish at 7 o'clock. By the time you get home, your family's had dinner already. So
exactly, and I think that's been one of the,
you see them.
Yeah, that's been one of the greatest things. I mean, that's the best. One of the best things about remotely. Whereas you might put in a few more hours, they're your choice of hours.
Yeah, and you can also be a bit more flexible, as you say, about when you start or finish on a normal job.
So is the flexibility of working from home, if in a future world where we can do it either, is the flexibility worth more than that kind of magical being in a room and having sort of creatively sparking off somebody who is in the room with you? Like, what is the payoff worth it?
I think ideally I would probably do a bit of both, is what I think would work really well. So you mix your projects up depending what they are. So you do a bit of both, yeah. Personally.
I honestly didn't, sorry, Rowan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think there is a danger that you end up mixing work and home to the point where work and home are not segregated. It's a really difficult one, which we've been working on as a company with all of our staff segregated and a distributed workforce, I'm told reliably is the new word for it. None of this remote, apparently that's negative. But our lovely distributed workforce, actually getting people to communicate and work together and share their workload and understand that it's okay to stop and say tomorrow's another day, that's proving quite hard.
I think it's the same in other industries as well. I mean, my husband works in something completely different, but I know lots of people like that he works with are sort of saying, but you just, now there's no reason to stop working. So it just goes on and on.
I think picking up on what Rowan just said, actually, it's I've got a separate space in a loft that I can get away from the family, and not everyone's got that. Yeah. If I didn't have that, it'd be bloody difficult, I think, because we're stuck in a kitchen with like kids making noise and crap going on. So I think it is really important you've got a separate space, whatever that is, and that obviously people don't all have that. So
I agree. I mean, I'm very lucky that I've got I'm in a shed, posh shed, and the kids are out there in the garden, so we can lock ourselves away, and I do. When they're all here and we're homeschooling, I do have my hours when I have to homeschool, but I can shut myself in here, and if I want to, I can lock the door, but I don't do that. But
you were the same, Sarah, weren't you? Your posture.
Yeah. I was lucky because my husband already had this for his own production company, so I just sort of took over.
Shoved him out
for a few weeks, yeah.
And now you're both arguing over it.
Yeah.
Okay, so shall we open up to some questions? We've got about 12 more minutes, but we can have a little bit running over. But are there any burning questions that people have? If you type them in the chat, I'll have a quick look and see as well, whilst people are thinking ones.
Can I chuck another comment in while questions are coming up? I do think it's important to think about the wider production team, whether that's the production manager or the production accountant in the case of the production side of the company, or the post producer in the facility house, or the operational team. There does need to be a different form of communication. And when you're in a building, what tends to happen is as you walk past bookings, you say, oh, there's some more rushes coming in later. And so, whereas now there's a tendency to say, I've got a drive, I've given it to a courier, they're on their way, which building should they drop it off to? Because we're making sure that all of our buildings are open at some point of every day. And so there's much less sort of pre-planning, and we're finding that the edit producer and the editor know what's going on, or the producer director and the editor, but actually communicating is a bigger challenge for people. So there's that side of things as well. There's that sort of the wider team bit going on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got some good question about how do you market yourself, or how do you make yourself more employable as a remote worker? Because as you were saying as well, that you sort of are working with people that you've worked with before, because you've already established how you communicate with each other. So how would somebody who's not done it before sort of get a break as a remote editor or edit producer, and what skills would they need to demonstrate that they are good at?
An editor's pretty basic. It's like you just got to have good internet and a computer that has Avid on it. I'd say that's it really.
And I'd say as an edit producer, edit producers are communicators anyway. You've got to be. It's the same job, you just differently. And so I would go to the same companies who know you, who work for you. I don't think it's any different. It's a mindset that you need to get over, and everybody has the knee-jerk reaction to it. It's going to be a nightmare, but you get over it and you work with what you've got, and it's the same job. It's just slightly differently, and we were all used to horrible Zooms and chatting remotely. And I do admit there is nothing like an eye to eye, but we work with what you've got. You've got the skills already. You don't need to remarket yourself.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Okay. Oh, somebody's saying, are there any projects where remote editing just wouldn't work? Any type of program, genres?
Well, I would have said that about the hospital, but the hospital seemed to work. So
we're doing everything from the fastest turnaround current affairs, you know, literally camera turns over on Monday, on air within the week, right the way through to 8-10 week crafted arts programs, feature documentaries for the cinema. I mean, the whole gamut, the whole range. I think comedy is one of the harder ones to do remotely, because I think you need to, if you're sitting next to someone and they burst out laughing, then you know you've got the timing right. You know, it's harder to do that one. Someone asked earlier about reviews. I think reviews can go one of two ways. Either people give their response piecemeal because actually they think of something and then they think of something else and they think of something else. And they go on thinking of things because they haven't got other people in the room going, but it's okay, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, so they go on fiddling and fiddling, or they give an enormous amount of feedback, disproportionately large, in great detail, in an attempt to be helpful, but actually has perhaps the opposite effect. So understanding how to get feedback well, I think, is quite a nuanced art in this distributed workforce.
Understanding how to give feedback, I think, is something that many people have to learn.
Well, granted. Yeah.
Oh, Matt has to go now. So anyone who's got any specific emails for Matt, he's put his email there, or send to me and I'll forward to him. But thank you, Matt, for joining us.
All right, thank you. I hope it's useful. I know quite a lot of you there, so if I haven't seen you, hi, and drop me a line if you know me already. Lots of you do. Okay.
Thanks so much. Back to work. Back to
again, the kids have just told me they're going to eat my dinner.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I think they already will. So
get going, yeah.
Yeah, they just came to the shed door and said we're going to eat it.
Right. All right. Thank you so much.
The thing about remote is that dinner time is sacrosanct, and I can just say I'll be back in however long.
Okay.
So, thanks.
All right. Bye. We'll stay on for another few minutes anyway. So somebody is asking about the cost. Is it slower now? Is overall the well, doesn't edit in theory take longer because it's a bit more of a lag, the communication and the hiccups perhaps, and you know, is it going to cost more to run these edits if they're longer? And also the organization, the edit flow, the workflow organization, is it all going to cost more? And I don't know.
I mean, the remote editing should cost less, shouldn't it? I don't know. It depends if they're doing the ingesting or if we're doing the ingesting. You know, it depends how much is being done by the editor, how much done by the post house. Every job is variable, isn't it? I mean, probably Rowan and Jess know more about that.
I think you've got to be really careful. If you're trying to work independently on drives, then every time rushes come into the edit house, you've got to copy them onto the drives and courier them to the editor, and then the editor's got to start working with them and send their review copies to wherever they're going. And then when you come to do the online, you've got to hope that everything links up. Whereas the remote working solution, and I'm not just saying this is what we're offering, because we've got everybody working every which way. But the remote working solution emulates what you're used to doing. And we're managing that media. You're offlining with that media. Everyone's looking at the media together. And when it comes to the conform or the relink, as we like to call it these days, it's an automated process. So the only cost difference could be, one, your editor's doing more hours for the same number of weeks, because as Derek was saying, there tends to be a longer working week. And two, you might find that there's a small setup cost in the first place. In our case, it's almost negligible, but you know, a small setup cost to get it going in the first place. But other than that, there should be no other cost difference, because for us, you are using an Avid suite in our facility, but you just happen to use your home computer to control it. That's and right. Look at it and operate it.
Yeah. It worked really well for us. The remote thing I thought was great. I mean, if we had the addition of having to sort of fiddle around with drives, and dry's been sent here, it would have been really complicated, and it just, I don't think it worked actually. Do you, Sarah? Would have
No. And I genuinely don't think there was anything lost by being remote. I mean, I know people sort of talking about the, being in a room with someone and you can sort of get a sort of nuanced, feeling from them. I genuinely, maybe it is because Derek and I know each other, felt like it was literally the same. I just, like, we both knew what we felt was good material. We talked very openly. We were on the phone quite a lot of I didn't.
Yeah, you didn't miss that face-to-face contact.
I felt like I still had it in a weird way, even though it was via Zoom or on the phone or whatever.
I think it's also, at the moment, we're all sharing such a weird experience. You almost feel closer anyway, because you're like, I'm at home, you're at home, this is all so weird, and it sort of like brings you, you sort of are all...
It becomes a new normal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was an interesting comment on the radio this morning about how we have our home buddies and then we have our work buddies. And I think one of the places you make the best friends is in edit suites and working as edit teams and in the production office. And if we were to do this for any length of time, there is a risk that actually what happens is you're just working at home and connecting into a team of people you don't know very well. A bit like, when you've got a particular supplier or someone who you talk to a lot on the phone, and when you meet them for the first time, you discover they're blonde and you were sure they were going to be a brunette or whatever, And I think there is going to be a loss of social interaction and feeling involved and engaged and feeling ownership for a project over time. Pretty much everything we're doing at the moment is something we knew we've either worked on before, or it's something that we knew we had coming up, or the new projects coming on with teams that have not worked together before. I think that we're going to have to find new ways of creating that team. And generally speaking, people go off to the pub, don't they? They find ways of getting together to meet each other and get to know each other. And that's the bit that we're not being able to do at the minute. But hopefully we'll take the best of remote working, but combine it with some of the old-fashioned social skills that human beings are designed to want to have.
Oh, well, that sounds great. And if we end, so Helen is sort of asking about work. How much work is there coming up in the near and the far future? Because, I mean, there seems to be... some people seem to be on remote editing projects. Others haven't had any whiff of work for months. Obviously, filming is really difficult, and the filming has to happen before more editing happens. I'm guessing the editing that's happening at the moment, apart from in the hospital one, is series that were already filmed and are still being edited. But does anyone know when there's going to be lots of work coming up?
I wish I did.
Yeah.
No, it's bugger all, basically. I think everyone's finding the same thing. I mean, that's, the only thing that people are doing are archive-based things, which I've got something maybe in June, but yeah, it's all archive stuff. But yeah, no one's shooting the same.
We're doing quite a lot of current affairs type shows, fast turnarounds. A lot of them are about coronavirus. But then we also did the VE Day stuff, so that was all very, sort of events-based programming as well. But yeah, it's whatever's in the can at the moment. If it's there, then once that sort of dries up, then it's the current affairs stuff that's still going.
But then I do hope that there's going to be they have got to put stuff on the televisions in the at some stage soon. So I'm hoping what's going to happen is there's going to be an enormous demand for us sometime soon. And what I think we've all got to be really strong about is not reducing our rates dramatically because the commissioners have reduced the budgets. I think we've all got to stick to our rates and be strong about it.
Yeah, that's my worry, is that, having made something in 4 weeks or 5 weeks with the online, is then all these companies are going to go, oh, we can make a program. I mean, having said that, there was a lot of editors, additional people on it, but nevertheless, it's still cheaper. It must have been cheaper doing it in that time. So they're all going to be going, okay, we can save money here. It's be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
I think that was just a one-off, though. I don't think Label One would suddenly be expecting you to turn hospital around in 4 weeks. No, I really don't.
Well, let's see.
Yeah,
a lot of people are saying. I noticed, that talking about the relationships, what Rowan was saying, and I think it's true. I think that is it's all very well, us knowing each other, but yeah, you're right. With being in edits, you build relationships with new people, and especially people coming into the industry. If it was all remote, how the hell would they ever get into the bloody industry? It'd be impossible. So I do think there has to be a bit of both. There's got to be a bit of both, isn't there?
Yeah.
But maybe, going back, I can't remember who said it, but someone said earlier, I think it's Jess, that basically, you could start a project with the first few weeks quite easily, happily pulling at home and doing the dogleg work first of all at home, and then transferring into the edit suite for the final stages, because that's when it gets tricky, I think, wasn't it, Sarah? We shared screen and stuff, but when you're doing the more nuanced stuff, it gets a little bit trickier, because you're kind of you just want to sort of talk about it and do it. And you can't always do that as a remote system that efficiently, can you? I mean, we did it, but it's still a bit tricky.
And that was probably really key, that I knew you and I trusted you weren't going to cock it up. Basically. Yeah.
I don't know if it helps to know, but the BFC, the British Film Commission, put together a shooting plan for how to do the big film and drama shoots. And PACT is doing a sort of a mini version of that. And that was in consultation with the government last week. And from that, a plan to do safe shoots is emerging, which they hope will result in the big dramas and films getting going in a matter of weeks, not months. Now, it may not be a few weeks, maybe several weeks, but it's certainly not months. The problem at the moment is getting the insurance companies to actually insure the productions. And I'm sure, Sara, we all know about this one. It is a question of trying to get insurance in place that will enable everybody to get back to work. So if you're working for someone like the BBC, they're self-insuring. And I think there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try and get the government to insure as the insurer of last resort, if you like, for factual programming and so on. But the broadcasters are certainly realising that they can't just commission a comedy programme on Zoom and expect it to work, because it doesn't. PACT sent theirs out today. Okay. There is a thinking that the insurance companies will follow in the next few weeks, because of course, unless they get premiums, they don't have income. And they've just about to foot the biggest monumental bill known to man to pay for all of this stuff that's been going on, or some of it. Most of us aren't insured, but some of it. So that will probably be a push to going back to shooting. The post-production industry will be issuing our guidelines for how you can work in a post house and how you can attend, I think on Friday. Our consultation is going on right now. So post and VFX, we're already coming up with how we'll sanitize voiceover suites and get grading suites and review suites going and all those things. I
mean, someone I know, on that note, on the online, just before we went into lockdown, I was doing a project and on the farm, and basically someone was telling me they were on something else, finished doing the online, and they were put into separate rooms. So, the online editor would be in one room, they'd be in the other.
Yeah, we've been doing lots of that.
But actually for them, it just didn't work. They had all sorts of issues with, issues with sound or whatever, and it was a lag and things like that. And it wasn't great. It wasn't a great setup. But I mean, there's probably teething problems with all these things, I'm sure.
I guess we're lucky because we have a couple of current affairs contracts for big, huge amounts of programming that go out every week. So we've had to be quite sort of, we've got to make this work on site with people around and so on. So we've sort of crossed a few of those bridges already and managed to make it work, which is one of the reasons I think why the VE Day guys that Jess mentioned were around as well. But you do need a bit of space. You can't have shoebox edit suites. This 6 foot, 2 meters, depending on your viewpoint, does mean
that means edit suites are going to get bigger then, is it? That's great. Fantastic.
What were we saying about rates just now? We can't pay for very expensive buildings and put the rates down.
Well, I think we are lucky, those of us most of us on this Zoom who work in the post-production element of production, because there tends to be an editor and an edit producer and then a few other people, but I think we all will be in business. Programs will need to be edited, and it is a fairly slimline crew that are needed and used on those. I think from what I've been listening to about remote filming, they're trying to really reduce the number of crew on the ground, reduce the number of contributors, and there's so many more restrictions about filming. So I think for those who are worried that they haven't remote edited, so will they get remote editing in the future? I'm sure, as Matt said earlier, I'm sure you will. Your skills as an edit producer are not going to go away just because you haven't done it from home.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will be able to pick it up quickly. But what I think we all need to do is put our heads together and work out what productions can be filmed in the near future and how they can be filmed safely, so there's stuff for us to edit, because we won't be editing unless stuff is filmed. So
a good example is the Grayson Perry art show, which basically that was mainly done on Zoom. I mean, obviously they filmed him properly, but I mean, actually it's been really successful and it's been brilliantly done, I think, anyway. But it's, yeah, a lot of that is just by him talking to people on Zoom, and then someone's obviously filming him on a couple of, you know, different angles. But it's proof that it can work and work really well.
We're also on hospital. I mean, they weren't only filming within the hospital, where obviously there was really, really strict protocols, but we also did film with the families as well. And again, it was the same thing. So you'd have to go and stand in the garden, film through the window, keep your distance. If you got them to wear a radio mic, they had to put it on, you had to wipe it down, you had to quarantine some of the kit. We had GoPros that went into intensive care where we weren't allowed to go in. They had to be quarantined for 72 hours when they came out, so that there was no infection that could be passed on. So there are ways of working, and they are a bit strange and a bit more difficult, you know, particularly like filming cutaways in someone's living room through a window, you know, and all that sort of thing. But it is possible in a slightly different way. You just have to think about everything differently, I think.
Actually, someone just said Grayson Perry was done by remote camera rigs set up in his house.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and then, you know, you had Kirsty Allsop with a crew that came and lived in a house for 2 weeks before they started filming, you know, so that they were all isolated together. I don't think that's the long-term solution for all of this, especially as the R number goes down. But we've all got to be aware of it. We've got a voice-over to picture pack that we're sending out. We've set up 2, so that one, when it comes back, it sits in a box for 72 hours because you can't watch a microphone. So, you know, and if it's been in someone's home, then that's a problem. But it does mean that people can record to picture from their voice-over artist's house and so on, and don't have to necessarily come onto site if they don't want to.
Someone just mentioned about people job sharing. A good example of that is, I know someone who's doing Secret Life of the Zoo, and she's job sharing 3 days a week with someone else, and they split it, so at least both of them are working. So that is going on, and you know, they're working remotely. Exactly.
There's all sorts of new ways of working, not just the remote editing. This is sort of forcing our industry to look at so many elements about what things that we take for granted. Even being a freelancer is being examined more, and like what it feels like and what rights freelancers should have. And, you know, there's quite a lot of thought going into how people should work in the future and what's a better way. So it's there are positives coming out of this sort of enforced non-working or enforced isolation, aren't there? So, but anyway, I'd just like to say thank you so much to everybody for listening in, and thanks so much to our panel. Look out for more sessions on remote development, remote filming, any other remote ideas, how to make our industry better. And yes, stay safe, stay happy, stay positive, and have a good, really brilliant rest of the week. All the best. Bye.
Thanks, Jo.
Nice. Well done, Jo.
Bye.
Bye.